What up, Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and I'm back with another episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. I'm joined by a very special guest to the podcast, Jimmy Watkins. And Jimmy, before we even get into anything Cavs related, a subtexter came and sent us a text today talking about he's been listening to every episode and was wondering if we were going to bring you on full time, my guy. The fans love you.
And I love them back. I always try to I love talking ball. I always tell Ethan and Chris whenever you need me, I try to answer the call. It just depends on what else I'm juggling that day. But we always appreciate kind words. Thank you, subtexters.
Yeah, and Chris is under the weather today. He's got a lot going on. We got availability tomorrow. He's flying out to Vegas for Summer League on Thursday. It's a lot going on. So we're going to give the big man a day off. He gets paid the big bucks to take some big Z's, and we're going to get into some different conversations surrounding the Cleveland Cavaliers. And Jimmy, it is going to be a subtext question kind of day. We're going to get into the questions from our subscribers. But first, there is a topic that I think is going around and is important to start with before we get into those things. And that, Jimmy, is talking about Evan Mobley and the necessity for the Cavs to extend him this offseason. But also an underlying thing with that is Isaiah Mobley was not issued a qualifying offer by the Cavs this offseason. Obviously, we've seen Evan Mobley and Isaiah Mobley this summer working on their games together, whether it was at Los Angeles, being with Donovan Mitchell at the Spider Elite Camp, whether it's on Instagram stories, Instagram Reels, whatever it is. Isaiah and Evan, Isaiah being the bigger brother to Evan Mobley, has been together and trying to get better. But Jimmy, how important do you think it is for the Cavs to try and figure out a way to get Isaiah Mobley even just back on the G League roster? Because without a qualifying offer, he is now an unrestricted free agent.
I guess mildly, if at all. I mean, I think the Cavs, if the Cavs are worried at all about losing Isaiah Mobley, then them pulling the qualifying offer means that they are probably pretty confident that no one else is going to come in and offer him anything. I mean, Isaiah Mobley's NBA experience to this point, pretty limited. Like I guess if any team had any interest in him, it would be based on their pre-draft eval of his. But I think that the Evan Mobley delay, and it's definitely a delay, like 3 other players in his class have signed max rookie extensions already. It's probably something akin to like the Donovan Mitchell situation where like the Cavs are just waiting on Evan. There's no hardball negotiation to be done here. It's like, here, Evan Mobley, here's a max rookie extension with the potential for it to become a supermax if you win Defensive Player of the Year or make All NBA. And then Evan Mobley says, great, and signs. And oh, you know what? Maybe he also says, can we get Isaiah back? And they say, sure, but order of operations. The reason they would pull, the only reason I would think they would pull the qualifying offer if they want Isaiah back is like it helps with house cleaning if you're trying to do something else. Because if you extend a qualifying offer to somebody, that means that their cap hold, however low, Isaiah Mobley, I'm sure has about as low of a cap hold as you can have. I haven't looked at the cap sheet recently, but that just means that their cap hold is still on your books while you try to make other free agent moves. So that there could be a couple of things going on there. I'd still rate me as extremely confident that the Cavs will have Evan Mobley back and Isaiah Mobley back in some capacity, like you said, likely on the G League roster.
Yeah, because, Isaiah is a guy that has been on the Summer League roster for the past 2 years. And I noticed that when he wasn't on the roster, I was like, hey, how interesting could this be? And the reason that the 2-for-1 deal came to mind was when Johnny Bryant joined the organization for Donovan Mitchell. and the Cavs. Obviously, we don't know how much of a move it is for the Cavs to get Johnny Bryant and Donovan Mitchell in the same room. Obviously, that was a thought for the New York Knicks to go get him when they were trying to pursue Donovan Mitchell. Obviously, Johnny Bryant being an associate head coach is a large role, and he's stepping into that under Kenny Atkinson, and it opens up the opportunity because we understand how the Cavs have operated over the past couple of seasons and how they've made coaching changes within house previously. How if Kenny Atkinson doesn't live up to the billing, that Donovan Mitchell could use that as a stronghold on the Cavs, potentially, in saying, "Hey, my guy wants a head coaching position. If you want my 10 years of service to come back and be with the Cavs, might be smart to make my guy a head coach because you know that I like him. You know I credit him with a lot of my success throughout my career, and like Chris has said on multiple occasions, he is one of the most influential people in his life outside of family. So that was the main thing when it came to my mindset for Isaiah Mobley and Evan Mobley, and why Evan might be holding out maybe a little bit to try and see what the Cavs do with Isaiah Mobley. And then the qualifying offer not being extended today was definitely something that I had my eye on. And I feel like it's interesting to think about how much Evan hung out with Isaiah when it was the season last year, and how much his brother means to him as a whole, because you understand that they are not just brothers. Like, they are best friends. Like, they are around each other. They're partners. And when you look around Cleveland, they have partnerships with brands together. It's not a solo thing for Evan. He's not the only person on billboards, especially when you're talking about the core four. But I think it's just important for the Cavs, and I'm on the same page as Jimmy. I don't think it's a huge deal because, of course, money talks more than anything else. You're in the Cavs are going to be throwing buku money at Evan Mobley this offseason. So it's going to be an interesting dynamic. But, Jimmy, I just wanted to get your thoughts on how that whole thing has been playing out.
Well, it's also just like, have you met Evan Mobley? Like, he's not really the kind of guy that I would expect to try to exert leverage over the guy. He's just the most soft spoken, like wouldn't hurt a fly. You know, he's not quite. I think he's still probably growing into his both of what the kind of player he's going to be and what kind of power he's going to wield over the Cavs. Again, it's still possible that he tells the Cavs or his agent tells the Cavs whatever. Like, Isaiah Mobley has to be around this organization in some form or fashion. Although if he's in the G League the whole year, you know, how much time are they? They're spending less time together. Let's put it that way. But yeah, I don't see many roadblocks ahead on the Mobley extension. He's probably, I don't know, he might be on vacation. He might be working camps like Donovan was. We know Evan was at Donovan's camp in LA. He might just operate on his own time. I don't think there's much to be worried about here for either party.
Yeah, and you mentioned things that Evan Mobley's been doing. He's been working out with the Guard Whisperer on Instagram. His name is On Olin Simflis. He's an NBA and WNBA consultant and shooting coach. So that's where I've been seeing Evan the most. Like I said earlier, on his Instagram story, on his Instagram reel, and if you look and pay attention, the only clips that are getting posted of Evan Mobley are him shooting beyond the arc. And that's not by coincidence, folks. But I think it's important also just to see his confidence going up for Evan and shooting from that range. I mean, he had the Dewey on today, the do-rag on today, just shooting, flowing, and doing his thing. He hit a couple in a row, and he looked like he was getting that high arc in his shot that we know that he needs, especially that he was working on in the regular season when he was coming back from injury and wanted to be a more involved part of the offense for the Cavs. But go ahead.
I was just say I appreciate your dedication to the grind, Ethan, and breaking down Evan Mobley's Instagram sizzle reels. Is that time of year? Um, but there are probably about 25 other centers in the NBA who are posting similar videos of them making threes who don't make threes. So I wouldn't read too much into that quite yet. You gotta show us when they count, Evan. Sorry, bud.
I think that's fair. I think that's fair. And to be fair, it's more so Evan reposting the post made by his coach and his trainer. And sure, I mean, like you said, Jimmy, he is a very soft spoken guy. He is more about the work than about the publicity that it could bring him. So it's not a ploy. I think it's just him getting work in and wanting to not be working in silence, quote unquote. But enough on Evan Mobley and Isaiah Mobley, because I think we touched on that pretty decently. This is going to be another episode of Hey Chris without Hey Chris. So we're going to get
Hey
into some of
Chris.
these.
Hey Chris, where you at?
So we're gonna get into some of these questions from our subtexters. I asked our subtexters and our subscribers to actually go and look at our YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify to see what topics we had touched on, because we don't want to repeat so much on this podcast. As much as things do come up more than once, we want to keep things fresh and we want to keep you informed on things that are happening on a daily basis, because obviously this airs 5 days of the week, and you can subscribe to Subtext for $3.99 a month to become a part of this community and get your takes off and give us your questions as well. But the first question coming from Dave in Tucson, who says he wants to know, where will you be staying for the NBA Summer League, and what's the favorite hangout bar for the NBA press? Um, well, I will not be going to Summer League in Las Vegas. That is a Chris job. That is he gets paid the big bucks. I'll be sitting at the crib watching like you all. But I will, if they do presses online like they did in 2020, 2021, I'll be on those calls. But other than that, it's more so just trying to watch and analyze from a bigger lens, going into stats, going into, like we talked about yesterday, the advanced stats rather than just traditional stats to understand what's going on. But as Chris has said on this podcast before, we're not reading too much in the summer league. We're just getting a sense of these guys and where they're at and how they can grow with this organization. Um, and okay, Jimmy, this is a question more for you. Also, still from Dave from Tucson, because I know you celebrated or may have been a part of the press room when it came to the Cavs championship run. So Dave from Tucson asked, other than the Cavs' private victory party after winning the NBA title, if you could go back in time and go to any event in Vegas live, what would it be?
My goodness. Uh any event in Vegas live. I would probably want to be there. I would probably want to be there either during a concert, a legendary concert, or yeah, during like I would like to be part of like a sports celebration party. Um I've heard some pretty crazy stuff about, unsurprisingly, J.R. Smith's 12 hours after that Golden State comeback from 3-1. So I think I'd like to just be part of J.R. Smith's posse on June 16th, 17th, 2016 in Las Vegas, whatever day that was.
I think that's a fair answer. I'm gonna go away from the sports. You said concert. I'm gonna go with an Usher concert in Vegas, and how he was tearing up the scene. I believe it was last year when he went on that crazy run. I am not going to take my girl to one of those shows. By the way, that's strictly forbidden in my book. No, I'm just kidding. But I think that would be my pick. Just go to an Usher concert. I'm a big R&B guy. R&B and hip hop's my niche when it comes to the music field. But I think it's definitely interesting to think about what these players get into. I mean, we heard
Mm.
about the Boston Celtics going all the way to Miami the night that they won the championship. So that's a little bit of an insight to how crazy these guys go when they throw a party or want to have some fun.
Real quick, you're seeing Usher now? Usher's, well, how old is Usher? Like 40 something? 50? Wouldn't you want to see him in his prime? Like right after, right, like peak Confessions Usher, you know?
I
That's what
think
I
that
would
might.
think.
I think that might be a little too messy for me. I don't
Fair
think
enough.
I don't. I also don't know if I was old enough to be going to see
Right, but we're going
Confessions.
back in time. We're going back
Fair
in
enough.
time.
Fair in this body. I mean, Usher is 45 years old. So, but I mean, the performances and also the people that were in the arenas that he was selling out. That more so, like if I could be like floor level with like the Las Vegas Aces and all of them while they were trying to get Usher because Asia Wilson was doing her thing, trying to get Usher's attention and come to games and stuff like that. That's more the scenery that I would think because of the other people that I know that would be there and are reminiscing on their childhoods at the same time.
You want to hang out with popcorn girl Kelsey Plum?
You know what? Nope. Jimmy's trying to get me in trouble. I'm gonna say no to the question. Plead the fifth and keep it pushing. All right now. So the next question from our subtexters comes from DJ in Colorado Springs. He says, "Any rumors about why CP3 signed with the Spurs? Could he be Pop's replacement in a few years?" I think that's interesting. I mean, I think the obvious answer for why Chris Paul would want to sign to the San Antonio Spurs is it's probably the easiest job he's going to have over his career, which is throwing lobs to a 7'4" guy that can catch almost everything. And it's a revitalization and reinvigoration of the Lob City team that he had with the Los Angeles Clippers, but this time it's a two-man show. Also, like learn obviously Greg Popovich is getting older and growing and all of those things. So it's a different environment than it was when he was coaching Tim Duncan and all of those guys. But Tim Duncan, CB3 actually took to social media today saying that Tim Duncan and some of those guys reached out to him when the trade happened and just being a part of that organization. We know that of the organizations in the league, that's one of the ones where a lot of different players would want to play. The other being like Dallas because of how they treat their players and treat their staff and things of that nature. But yeah, I mean, from a guard perspective, like you get to nurture some of the incoming rookies that could potentially get to the next level, and also just being around a guy like Victor Wembanyama who can score at all three levels at 7'4" and create for himself while also getting to know that he's gonna have playing time and potentially be a consistent player in their starting lineup. I think that's something that you would want if you're going to the latter portion of your career.
Yeah, there's definitely a role there for him. The Spurs definitely desperately needed organization last year. That's Chris Paul will get your ducks in a row offensively, no doubt. And maybe there is some part of him that wants to be linked to Wemby because he sees what's coming. Or I saw a quote from him today. I think they introduced him today, and Chris was saying that Wemby is the guy that gets talked about the most among NBA players after games. Like they're watching it. When they watch, they always have games on in the locker rooms after like the early games, 7 o'clock games, and teams are always watching either a finish of an 8 o'clock game or the beginning of a 9-10 o'clock game. Everyone's talking about Wemby. So that's part of it. Honestly, I'm very surprised he ended up there. What do you think he got? 1 year, 11 million, which is under the mid-level exception. Maybe he sniffed around and thought and didn't find anyone who would actually give him the full MLE. But I had Chris Paul earmarked as a Laker. I just thought that LeBron would throw his weight around yet again and have the Lakers go sign another one of his friends. And that every NBA player, I don't know for a fact that Chris Paul has a home in Los Angeles, but we know he used to live there, and we know that's the basically summer capital of the NBA. So yeah, I have some of the similar questions that Dave from Tucson has about that one. I'm excited though. I feel comfortable that Wemby has someone who can give him the ball on a reliable basis now. For probably 55 games out of the regular season. Let's be honest, Chris Paul still gets hurt a lot. But yeah, it's curious because that team, maybe sniffs the play-in next year. Chris Paul's 39. This is kind of his last rodeo or close to it. There's no ring chasing happening here. I guess we can applaud that.
Not running from the grind. Not running from the grind, Jimmy. And DJ from Colorado Springs, when it comes to the coaching portion of that, he kind of talked about that he came to hoop. He's not a coach. He wants to play. He even took to the scene to say that the decision to go to San Antonio, if he's not playing, then he's not happy. And this is an opportunity where he's not really fighting with another star guard or anybody of that nature for a starting position. And I think if he were to go into Los Angeles, there would have been conversations of that too, Jimmy. But
yeah, but who makes the decisions over there?
Yes, sir. The banana boat boys. Because I know you.
Melo could have come out of retirement.
Melo's talked about coming out of retirement so many times, dog. It's irrelevant to this point. But D Wade and Carmelo Anthony pulled up on LeBron James at the last day of camp for Team USA before they go to exhibitions. So that was pretty cool to see. Obviously, Chris Paul is still in the league, so he can't just willy nilly roll over to Las Vegas. But it's an interesting concept, and we'll see. I know Chris Paul loves ball. I think he has an EYBL or an AAU team after him that he sponsors. So I think that would be a conversation for down the line, maybe after his contract expires this next year. But the next question from our subtexters comes from Bob in Honolulu. We got reach now, Jimmy. Hold on now. Bob in Honolulu asks, does the Paul Reed signing for the Pistons affect their ability to sign Isaac Okoro? I think that's interesting because you look at what those two guys can bring both offensively and defensively, but you also look at how much cap space the Detroit Pistons have. It's more so about where they have room to grow. They also just got JB Bickerstaff, so I feel like there's an allure there for Isaac Okoro to go join a guy that immediately kind of threw him into the fire when they drafted him and was like, hey, we know what you can do. Show us, and we're going to put you up against some of the toughest guys so you can grow immediately. So that's kind of in that sense, that's like the opposite of what happened with Amani Bates and Bronny James, where they're in a situation where they can kind of learn behind the scenes. Isaac didn't have that luxury. Isaac got drafted and got thrown into the fire with J.B. Bickerstaff. So now it's with J.B. Bickerstaff being the coach of the Detroit Pistons, the opportunity arises for him to go over there potentially, even though the Cavs gave the qualifying offer to Isaac Okoro. So it's based on what the Cavs are willing to pay and who's willing to go after Isaac in this market.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what the Pistons cap situation is. But I will say that I think the Cavs, I'm not Chris, I don't know as many things, but I do think the Cavs are taking a go get an offer and come back to us kind of approach with Isaac. Like they're not guarding against an offer sheet is what I would say. I think the Cavs are betting that whatever Isaac is asking for, if we're like the mid-level is $12 million, I'm sure he wants more than that. So let's, somewhere between 15 and 20 as like a starter-ish kind of player, spot starter at times last year. Personally, that's a little rich for my blood, and I'm sure Kobe Altman feels the same for a guy who, frankly, we can talk all about the year-over-year improvements with the three-point shots, but he's just not making enough in the playoffs, which is when they need him to make them the most. So I think if there's a team that wants Isaac Okoro badly, and I like JB Bickerstaff coached team would seem to fit that mold to me, I think the opportunity is there if they pony up enough dough to steal Isaac away. But it's because the Cavs are, again, I think the Cavs are betting that the big offer isn't coming and that they will either find a deal closer to that mid-level number, even below, or that Isaac will just take the qualifying offer and we'll have this conversation again next summer.
I think it's also interesting because we mentioned playing time for Chris Paul, but I think that's also a thing for Isaac. I remember my first time talking to Isaac, it was in one of the games where he was being kind of bounced around from a bench player to a starter, and I was still learning the team and all of those things at that point in time. And I was like, "Hey, Isaac, like, how does it feel to go from the bench to the starter, and how does your role change, and how do you grow in that sense?" And he was like, "Well, I was a starter before all of these other guys got here. Essentially, I was like that. I could do that. I was getting more minutes, and not like he took it disrespectfully, but he was like, I am somebody that I consider myself to be an NBA starter. I consider myself to be worthy of having the opportunity to play. There's just not enough opportunities on this team for me to get the amount of love that I think I deserve." So I think that's more so why we haven't seen like Isaac Okoro be like, "Okay, yeah, I'm going to sign this qualifying offer," because I feel like he thinks he's better than what the Cavs are willing to give him. And I don't discredit the ambition and all of those things. And I wanted to look at some of the numbers and comparisons between Isaac Okoro and Paul Reed as well, because we know Isaac Okoro is listed as 6'5", 225 pounds. Paul Reed is listed as 6'9", 210 pounds. So basically, I think he's like a more of a small forward, power forward, stretch forward when it comes to Paul Reed. But looking at Paul Reed's stats from last,
Paul Reed's an undersized. He was playing backup center for Philly. He's an
which is
undersized front court guy.
right,
Yeah.
which is crazy to me because I'm looking at his Philly career because he's been there for the last 4 seasons. And this past year, he had his most points per game at 7.3 points per game. He averaged 54% from the field on 5.9 field goals per game. He also shot 36.8% on just zero point 0.7 attempts from the 3-point range. So he's not a shooter by any means. And then you got Isaac Okoro, on the other hand, who finished last season averaging 9.4 points per game. He averaged 27.3 minutes per game last season. He played in 69 contests and started in 42. Obviously, we know in his rookie season in 2020, 2021, when he was drafted with the 5th overall pick, he played and started in 67, all 67 games that he played in, he started in. But looking at this past season, he shot 49% from the field on 7 field goal attempts, and then also shot 39.1% from beyond the arc on 3.1 3-point attempts. 39.1% is his best 3-point percentage of his career. He's obviously grown every single season. His rookie season, he was 29%. Sophomore season, 35. Last year was 36.3, and this last season that just finished was 39.1. So that's a substantial growth every single year. And I'm gonna say this now because I feel like I have to touch on it for a second. We have a military personnel in our subtext family, and he consistently talks about how Isaac Okoro is the most athletic guy on the team. He consistently talks about how losing Isaac would be the biggest mistake for the Cavs this offseason because of what he can bring and how he grows, and how the Cavs have too many unathletic players is the word that he uses. So I think it's interesting, and I want to get your thoughts on that, Jimmy. How you measure the importance of athleticism, and rather than the stats that everybody's bringing on a nightly basis.
I mean, Donovan Mitchell's pretty athletic, I would say. That guy's, I mean, he's just smaller. To me, the thing with Okoro is perimeter defense, which is, there's definitely a correlation between athleticism and perimeter defense. You lose Isaac Okoro, there is no guy on the roster as presently constructed that defends at the level that he does. I think Max Strus is a fine perimeter defender who
Dean
works
Wade would be
hard.
my Dean Wade would be my argument.
Sure, but he's not guarding this necessarily the same guys that. In some cases, there's overlap, but like Isaac Okoro is guarding the best guard or the best
True.
wing or whatever. Dean Wade is not guarding. I don't know. Pick a Kyrie Irving for example. That's not the matchup for him. But like and Dean Wade, his value is less as like again the lockdown perimeter guy. Isaac Okoro would be a very specific guy they don't have. What I'll say about that though is that I think you can find other guys who like on the scrap heap who can approximate like have a similar role as Isaac Okoro, play defense and make enough threes if they leave you wide open some of the time. Basically, like defensive specialist kind of guys are defensive specialists who have jump shots in progress, let's say, are cheaper than Isaac Okoro wants to be. And there are a lot of good athletes wandering around the NBA that you can try and plug into some of these kinds of situations. So again, I think that the Cavs are playing a little game of chicken right now with Isaac. And the fact that we haven't heard anything about them bringing them an offer sheet or that, we're not agreeing to anything. And all the while, a lot of these cap space teams are spending their money on other stuff bodes well for the Cavs side of the chicken game and not as well for Isaac Okoro. Isaac Okoro in terms of like getting the bag.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I think that the Cavs, we've talked about it coming into this offseason, that's what they were going to put their money in, was try and figure out if Isaac Okoro was going to be a sweet treat for other teams to come and get this offseason. And it looks like he is kind of falling and back into the hands of the Cavs. But I want to read this monologue from one of our subtexters because he says we haven't answered this question, and just hang on to your seats, folks. All right. USAFA Sarge says, Ethan, you or Chris have yet to answer this question. Dorian Finney-Smith will be 32 next birthday, making him 8 years older than Okoro. He shot 34% from three, averages less points per game, cannot create his own shot, and his lateral movement is less than half of Okoro's. Fedor continually says Wade's stats are not important because he does so much for the Cavaliers, quote unquote. Yet, stats are the first thing Fedor uses to criticize Okoro. Wade averages 5 points per game, cannot create his own shot, gets blown by repeatedly, has some of the worst handles in the entire league. That, hypothetically, he can guard three positions, quote unquote, or he is a few inches taller, are irrelevant because Wade does nothing, all caps, that shows up on the stat sheet. The question is simple. Based on stats and versatility, what makes Finney-Smith or Wade a better fit for the Cavaliers than Okoro? What are you getting from Finney-Smith and Wade that you cannot get from Okoro, who's much younger and twice as athletic? Sarge says, Fedor likes to say teams ignore Okoro's shooting. Are we to believe that teams will clamor to guard a Finney-Smith who shoots 34% from three, or Wade who is literally afraid to shoot? He says volume is important. Okoro shoots just as many threes per game as does Wade and Finney-Smith. Okoro is a 5% better three-point shooter than Finney-Smith, 5% with 3 exclamation points after it. Letting Okoro go would be a huge mistake. The Cavaliers will quickly realize the type of player they desperately need is, you guessed it, Isaac Okoro. So when I said it was a monologue, that's a monologue, folks. That's it. But I think he makes some good points, right? But this goes back to the advanced stat thing that we talked about yesterday on yesterday's podcast, and understanding that Dean Wade ranked 3. He was number 3 in the entire NBA of defensive rating for players that played 50 or more games this season. And he was playing on one leg in the playoffs and was the best defender for Jason Tatum. And Jason Tatum is Boston Celtics' best scorer and was the best scorer in the NBA Finals as well. So there are a couple things to look at. But Jimmy, I want to get your immediate reaction to our military personnel's monologue that I just read.
Okay, first of all, I freaking love the passion. These are the kind of emails where whether they're telling me I'm a genius or an idiot, I love reading them. So shout out to Sarge on that front. So the difference between Isaac Okoro, Dean Wade, and Dorian Finney-Smith, a few things. The difference between Isaac Okoro and Dean Wade as shooters, convince me. I don't know. Dean Wade has a slightly higher volume and maybe a slightly longer track record of being an above average 3-point shooter. He shot 35.5%. Basically every season since he's started playing real minutes in the NBA. And he shot like Okoro around 39% last year. I'm not sure if I believe that either of their 3-point shooting numbers from last season are all that real and applicable going forward, which is where I think the Dorian Finney-Smith thing kicks in. So Dorian Finney-Smith, while he did shoot 34.8% from three last year, he has shot 37.5% or better in 1, 2, 3 of the previous 4 years. I don't know. He's been traded a couple times, so his basketball reference looks a little weird. 3 of the last 5 years, 3 of the last 4 years. And crucially, Dorian Finney-Smith in the playoffs. By the way, Dorian Finney-Smith attempts a full 3-point attempt more than Isaac Okoro for his career. And over the last 4 or 5 years, he's shooting about 5 a game, which is a big step up from Isaac shooting 3 a game. And shooting 3 a game when he is wide open. Teams actually guard Dorian Finney-Smith. Dorian Finney-Smith in the playoffs is a career 42% 3-point shooter in 35 games. That's when you need to make 3-pointers. Isaac Okoro is a career 27% 3-point shooter in the playoffs. That's when you need to make 3-pointers. That's when teams really hone in on the scouting report and are saying Isaac Okoro, our goal on every possession is to have you shoot a 3-pointer. Like if the Cavs are whole and Donovan Mitchell's out there doing his thing, an Isaac Okoro 3-pointer is a victory for the defense. And then I would say basketball is for tall people. Isaac Okoro is 6'5". Dean Wade is 6'9". Dorian Finney-Smith is 6'7". I love Isaac Okoro. I think he's an awesome defender. I think he's a bulldog. I think he can guard up in some spots, but like Dean Wade size-wise, just a better matchup based on the height for guys like Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, even like Paolo Banchero. The Cavs' best defender against Paolo Banchero was Evan Mobley, right? Because he's got the size. Whereas Isaac Okoro, even though Isaac Okoro played perfect defense sometimes against Paolo, there were times where Paolo just said, "Oh, I'm going to shoot a turnaround over you," and there wasn't a ton that Okoro could do about that. I'm not saying that Isaac Okoro would not be a sizable loss for the Cavs defense because, as I said, I don't think that they have anybody who can replicate exactly what he does as a perimeter defender. However, I would say that if Isaac Okoro was asking, again, for like 15 million plus, like that's pretty much what Dorian Finney-Smith makes next year or did last year. Yeah, he's got 14.9 next year and then a player option after that. I'd rather have Dorian Finney-Smith at that price. And I think what's Dean Wade on a 3 years 30? Like
I don't know what the exact numbers are on Dean Wade. All I know it's very team friendly. Very team friendly.
I believe it was 3 years. I don't know. They have him at 3 years, 18 and a half. So like if the Cavs again, if the money's all the same and the Cavs get Isaac Okoro for 3 for 19, heck yeah, sign me up. That's just not realistic. Isaac Okoro is not signing that contract. He's signing the qualifying offer, and he would probably like to make Dean Wade's entire contract in 1 year. So that's the conversation we're having here.
I think the other thing, first of all, Jimmy, round of applause for holding down the fort for that long. That was crazy, crazy work. But also, I think you have to look at playoff numbers, right, and how important Isaac Okoro's shooting is for this team going forward, and how he has underperformed in the playoffs, right? So I pulled up some stats while Jimmy was giving you guys all of the insight for the numbers and the comparisons of Dorian Finney-Smith. And I wanted to go into Dean Wade versus Isaac Okoro because that seems to be one of the conversations being had. So, this past playoffs, Dean Wade played in 3 games, and Isaac Okoro, I believe it says he played in 12. And so, of shots that NBA.com references as wide open, so that's 6 or more feet with no defender near them, Isaac Okoro shot 30% from the field. He shot 2.5 field goal attempts per game and made just zero point 0.8. From 3-point range, he shot 30%. He shot 2.5 3-point attempts and made just zero point 0.8, right? So consistent from the floor and from 3-point range because that's all that he shot was 3-pointers. And Dean Wade was similar but not the same. Dean Wade was shot 37.5% on field goals when he was wide open 6 or more feet from the nearest defender on 2.7 field goal attempts, making one of those every time. And from 3-point range, the average jumps all the way up to 42.9 in comparison to Isaac Okoro's 30%. He shot 2.3 3-point attempts per game and made one on each occasion for average. So that's the conversation we're having, right? The difference during the playoffs. And obviously Dean Wade has a smaller sample size and all of those things. But we know that Dean Wade was playing on a hurt leg. We know that Isaac Okoro was fully healthy and was being guarded at times by the center, allowing him to just get open looks and be by himself and still struggling to make those shots. So even if we want to move it the stats a little bit closer to an open percentage of 4 to 6 feet by NBA.com standard, Isaac Okoro shot just 20% from the floor, and he shot 0% from 3-point range on open attempts 4 to 6 feet from the nearest defender, right? And then you look at Dean Wade, who didn't really get the same opportunities because he was either wide open or he wasn't shooting the ball. So that's the different things when you talk about those stats. And I feel like if you look at, I want to close it even further. Let's go to very tight, where the nearest defender was 0 to 2 feet from him, right? Isaac Okoro had a 0% field goal percentage on those attempts, right? And if you go to 2 to 4 feet, so just tight defense from the nearest defender, Isaac Okoro still 0% from the floor. It's just because you see the difference when it comes to when he's being left open and it's still not being as productive as the team needs it to be for him to stay on the court and not get ran off the court. This is the second year in a row for the playoffs that Isaac Okoro has got ran off the court. Sure, you can make the argument it's the second year in a row that Dean Wade hasn't been available for the Cavs in the playoffs. But I think you have to look at the advanced metrics when it comes to the shooting and the percentages and things of that nature. You can't just look at athleticism because, sure, Isaac Okoro can create better in space when it comes to transition because he's faster than Dean Wade, but that doesn't happen all as often as you would think rather than watching it on the TV screen. But yeah,
it's the defense, like you said. Isaac Okoro is a better finisher in transition. Okay, I'll give him that. But we just talked about how few two-pointers he's attempting. We're talking about defenses are leaving you open in the playoffs. Are you making threes? And he's not. He's not. Dean Wade, in a very short, small sample size, did it a little more often. And again, I'm not super confident that he will shoot 42% from three next playoffs on a larger volume, or that his 39%, that either of their 39% marks for the regular season, although Dean Wade did shoot almost 4 a game, which gives me a little bit more trust, will bleed into next year. But like, I've just seen more from Dean Wade, and again, he's locked up at a number that works. As Okoro wants to dip into the bank a little bit more. And what's the difference? Why should I pay you more? I'll flip the question on Sarge.
And the last thing I'm gonna say on this topic is the stats get so much smaller when you get to like tight coverage or very tight coverage. One, because these teams are leaving them open. Both of them. They're wide open or open by the NBA.com scale because teams don't trust that shot.
When Dean Wade and Isaac Okoro are guarded tightly and they have the ball, they pass. That's what happens.
Yeah, but let's move on to the next question, and because I think that was a good question and we got into multiple different things. I think it was very detailed. Let's get into the last question for today's podcast. All right. This question comes from another subtexter that says, what I have noticed about the NBA is stretch fours usually are not good at interior defense. One of the primary reasons for our top 10 defense, one of the primary reasons for our top 10 defense in the past 3 years is the interior defense of our big men. This also has been accompanied by a top 15 offense. May you guys explain the pros and cons of our big men pairing to the audience? I think this is interesting because we talk a lot about the pairing of Jared Allen and Evan Mobley and the growth that needs to happen for Evan Mobley to expand and grow the pairing, right? Because if you are able to space the floor with a 7-foot big man that is also one of the premier defenders in the NBA, that that evaporates the issue that comes with clogging the paint that the Cavs have seen for the past couple of seasons under JB Bickerstaff. Sure, there's also schemes that can be put in place by Kenny Atkinson that could help this, but Jared Allen's got his game. And the most you're going to see him is that little floater and that little midi that he's got around the free throw line. But Evan Mobley has the ability, and we've been seeing him work, as we mentioned earlier, on growing that three-point shot and continuing to push his limits on the offensive end. He's worked on his handles as well and trying to see how he can grow in creating on his own. And once Evan Mobley is able to do that confidently, both create on his own and make three-pointers, whether it's catch and shoot situations, whether it's dribble situations, whatever, the spacing is going to allow one, Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell to both have more options on the offensive end. Two, Jared Allen not feel like he is congested in the paint with two big men, 2 7-footers standing in there taking up so much space. And three, it'll allow for Evan Mobley's confidence to grow and for his accolades to start rolling in because you understand how good he is on the defensive end and him just needing to take a step for this Cavs organization to also take the next step and for him to potentially be the front runner and also the running mate with Donovan Mitchell.
Okay, so the Cavs defense is awesome primarily because of the two big men. They're both elite rim protectors, but they're both elite at getting vertical. Like they are always in the top part of the league in field goal percentage against at the rim. Even though I don't remember what I know, Jared Allen was a low blocks guy last year, and Mobley was sending stuff in the playoffs, but in the regular season, I don't think he was quite as prolific as a shot blocker. But they're also both really agile, which is so crucial because a lot of teams would love to just put two tall guys back there and block off the rim. But the reason why a lot of teams can't do that is because there are not a lot of big guys who can move like Jared and Evan, and teams will try to get the Cavs away from or we'll try to get Evan and Jared away from the rim by putting floor spacers out there that one of them has to guard because they're sharing the floor at the same time. But the beautiful thing about both of them is they can close out to a guy in the corner or on the wing or whatever and still recover. Like they can shade towards that shooter and recover fast enough and move quickly enough to still contest or block a shot at the rim. From and cover all that ground. That's why both of them are so awesome. And with both of them, you always have an elite a rim protector on the floor, always, because JB and Kenny will do this too. We'll have one of them on the court at all times. Like if Jared Allen takes a breather, Evan Mobley's the center, and if Evan Mobley takes a breather, Jared Allen's the center. So you always have a great defensive player, a great defensive anchor on the floor at all times. As Ethan said, the problem with that is that they both occupy the same space or similar space on offense. Evan Mobley would like, in an ideal world, Evan Mobley would like to be the lone big in the paint, and he would like to actually catch the ball and do some more face-up stuff, attack opponents off the dribble, and be a playmaking hub and all that sort of thing, which Kenny Atkinson plans to do with him more. And I think you can do a little bit with Jared Allen. JB had a cool thing going with those two. They do some good big to big passing. But inherently for guys like Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland, who are trying to get to the rim so they can either score or spray out to shooters, if there's a big man standing down there in the dunker spot, which one of them always has to be if they're both on the court, like you're just making life easier on the opponent's rim protector. Because like now I don't have to do the Jared Allen Evan Mobley thing where I rush from the corner to have to run in, from 17 feet out to protect the rim. I can just take 2 steps forward because Jared Allen's right here on my hip, basically. Even if I take 2 steps forward and Donovan Mitchell dumps that off to Jared Allen, I can recover in time to at least contest the dunk, if not stop the dunk, or I can deflect a potential lob pass, things of that nature. The reason why Evan Mobley's 3-point shot development is so crucial is because if he can make defenses respect him, I'm not talking, I mean, we want to see attempts, but like if Evan Mobley shoots 36, 37% from 3 next year on like 2 attempts and most of them are open, and then kind of does what he usually does in the playoffs, I wouldn't like that's progress, but that's not what the Cavs need. Like they need someone who will force defenses to stay out there as a floor spacer. They need him to be respected. And I think that a lot, like I was just when you were asking that question, Ethan, I was Googling Evan's college stats real quick. Like he only took 1.2 threes per game in college during his freshman season. He only made 30% of those. I think we've been doing, like, since day one, a lot of projecting on Evan Mobley's offensive potential, and we're still projecting. We're still talking about potential, and I think fans heard the buzzwords like unicorn and stretch big who can protect the rim, and they're like, oh, that's great. I can't wait to see that happen immediately. And it's like, no. Like, again, Evan Mobley, 70% free throw shooter, a decent indicator. Like normally, if you want a guy to become a good 3-point shooter, you'll look at his college free throw percentage, and that gives you reason to cross your fingers or not. 70% for a big guy is reason to have optimism, but it's not like it was actually 69.4, but like that, it says to me that there's probably still some touch to be added there. You know what I mean? So like this is a long process. The Evan Mobley thing, I know everyone's tapping their feet, and when Evan Mobley does inevitably sign a massive contract extension, there are going to be people flooding subtext saying, I can't believe we're paying a guy who only scores blah, 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 blah. Sometimes he disappears on offense. It's all true. But that's going to be a bet on, again, projecting forward and potential, and he's still very young. And again, 3-point percentage wise, he may never get there, but the Cavs are working with him on it. And we've seen glimpses, moments here and there that gives you hope that maybe you can squeeze something out of him as a shooter.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's also important when you talk about the defensive end of the ball, Jimmy, as you were getting into, is how Jared Allen and Evan Mobley rely on each other to a point where when one of them was off the court this past season, Jared Allen was like, I had to snap myself back into reality and do the job of both of us, because Jared Allen usually stays in the middle and allows Evan Mobley to roam and play like a free safety on defense and come out of nowhere and swat shots like Jimmy was alluding to. Because when you have the determinant of Jared Allen and you have Evan Mobley just lurking everywhere, because we know Evan Mobley is not only able to guard in the paint, he's able to guard pretty much 2 through 5 when it comes to the defensive end of the ball, and being able to stick with speed wise and lateral movement with some kinds of guards depending on their size and length. But Jimmy, you also talked about their block stats. I mean, when it comes to block percentage, percent of team blocks, Evan Mobley had 45% and Jared Allen had 36.3%. And then Evan Mobley averaged 1.4 blocks per game and Jared Allen averaged 1.1 blocks per game. So they're getting it done on that end of the floor. There's no question about it. And
by the way, those aren't like lead the league in block shots type numbers. And they obviously they take away from each other in that regard too. Like Evan's blocking shots that Jared won't block, Jared will block shots that Evan won't block. But I would say it's like, for as much, particularly the way the Cavs played defense and funneled every shot toward them at the rim last year, to me it's like, look at their low foul counts, man. Like Evan Mobley, 2.5 fouls per game for his career. Jared Allen, since he arrived in Cleveland, over 2 fouls a game one time, 2 fouls for his career. Like, that's crazy for rim protecting bigs. That's the most important, or the most impressive thing to me. They defend so well without fouling, and they aren't crazy blocks guys, so they're really just sticking their hands up and getting in the way, and they're doing it really well. Like, being vertical is a hard thing to do against these great athletes who are so shifty, and those guys are always in a good position. That's why they're so good.
I think the other thing on top of that is, you mentioned them being vertical. They're not blocking shots out of bounds. They're blocking shots down and allowing the guards to get out and run and transition and creating those opportunities. And that's a different thing that we're going to see from Kenny Atkinson, something that Jay Bickerstaff was trying to get out of this Cavs team. Like we talked about during last season, we could see Jay Bickerstaff hitting the third baseman windmill, trying to get the guys up the floor. But they understand now that they're going to have to move in space and pace and all of those things to get out and run. And Jared Allen and Evan Mobley blocking shots not out of bounds like we remember Shaquille O'Neal doing and things of that nature creates opportunities for them to begin the break. And that's something that we want to look forward to going into next season. Also, I mean, people think that Jared Allen's old too. Jared Allen just turned 26 in April, and Evan Mobley is just 23. He just turned 23 in June. So these are guys that are still growing. Jared Allen, I believe, entered the league at 19 years old. So, and Evan Mobley is young as well. So it's getting into the system, getting into a groove, understanding who you're playing with, why you're playing with these guys, and how you can help each other. That's another reason why the Cavs are looking to keep this core four intact, because as Kobe Altman said at his end of season presser, it was just year 2 of the Donovan Mitchell experience. And now we're going into year 3 potentially with the core four intact. It opens a lot of different opportunities for this team to continue to grow going into this next season. But with all that being said, that'll wrap up today's episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. So remember to become a Cavs insider and interact with Chris, me, and Jimmy by subscribing to Subtext. Sign up for a 14-day free trial or visit cleveland.com/Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word STOP. It's easy. But we can tell you that the people who sign up stick around, because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from me, Jimmy, and Chris. This isn't just our podcast, it's your podcast. And the only way to have your voice heard is through Subtext. Y'all be safe. We out.